which simply says it is recognised that the Parliament of the United Kingdom is sovereign. Now, that may look quite innocuous, but in fact it opens a very large can of worms. Because there are several issues that become live as a result of that statement, which I don't think is needed, actually. I don't see the point of putting that in there, apart from it's almost like graffiti. It doesn't have any real purpose, as far as I can see. But the sovereignty of the UK Parliament is a matter of convention, not law. There is nothing in law that says the UK Parliament is sovereign. There are declarations that the Parliament of England was sovereign, but that disappeared in 1707. And so there's nothing in law that declares that until now. So this is quite a profound change. And the effect of that is that whilst over the last few decades the courts have respected the convention of UK parliamentary sovereignty, there have been many statements made by various judges over the years that there may be occasions when they would not recognise it. Let's say, for example, that Parliament passed a ridiculous law or a clearly draconian law, then the courts would not feel bound to respect UK parliamentary sovereignty in those circumstances. This gets rid of that. If it's expressly declared that the UK Parliament is sovereign, then there is no rule for the courts at all, no matter how draconian the legislation might be. And that, to me, is of great concern. That's a clear example of the elective dictatorship that Lord Hilsham talked about in 1976, which he then forgot about when he was in government. But there we are. Secondly, this cuts right across Scottish constitution. People's eyes might start to droop when I start talking about this, but it's an important principle. Scottish constitutional law does not recognise any kind of sovereignty in Parliament, only in people. And the Scottish courts have from time to time made statements that if they felt that an act of the UK Parliament cut across the Act of Union 1707, then they would strike down that act in Scotland. You look at this case law in 1953, case law in 1975 that suggests that. It's not what we call ratio. It's not something that binds the courts, but there are observations made by judges. Now, what this section seems to do is to remove that. If the UK Parliament is sovereign, it is sovereign across the whole of the UK, and that is not something that is recognised in Scottish constitutional law. So there's another issue there that would need to be dealt with. It doesn't affect us, perhaps, but we certainly have an interest in it because a new legal principle is being inserted into Scots law for the first time ever. And that is bound to create friction, I'd suggest, in Scotland. Finally, of course, the difficulty from a practical perspective is that, First Minister, both you and I do not accept that the UK Parliament should be sovereign. You've said quite rightly that sovereignty should be shared. And so what this does is entrench in law something which you and I would profoundly disagree with. Now, the question is this then, given something that appears to be quite harmless on the face of it, given its effect in terms of putting in law something that's never been in law before, in other words, the sovereignty of the UK Parliament, given the fact that it changes the ability of the courts, in my mind, to intervene where the courts feel that it's appropriate, and given the fact that it cuts across what we have both said this afternoon, I'm simply going to leave it in this way with you. Would the Welsh Government then consider what representations it would need to make to the UK Government in relation to Clause 38?
I completely agree with what Karen has said. This is a clause that either means nothing. I like the phrase constitutional graffiti, and should just be deleted because it's just there as some bit of red meat window dressing for the ERG. Or it means something very significant, in which case it deserves to be debated and understood a great deal more than it will be during the very rapid passage of this bill, which is really not about issues of parliamentary sovereignty, and it certainly does not reflect the views that we discussed earlier about the way, 20 years on, sovereignty is dispersed across the United Kingdom.